All right, so let's dive into something that's been kind of bugging me.
Okay.
You've probably seen that Skibidi toilet thing
Yeah.
taking over the internet lately, right? A singing head in a toilet.
It's everywhere.
It's bizarre, and it's got everyone talking about brain rot. But what if brain rot isn't just a funny meme?
Right.
What if it's like a real thing happening to our brains because of technology?
Yeah.
That's what we're going to unpack today.
Fascinating topic. And it's one that researchers have been looking into for years.
Right.
I mean, brain rot isn't like a formal medical term,
Hmm.
but the dictionary defines it as like the deterioration of mental faculties.
Yeah.
And there's a growing body of evidence suggesting that our constant use of technology might be contributing to just that.
And we've got a stack of research to go through today.
Yeah.
Studies from places like Harvard, Oxford, Stanford.
Big names.
We'll break down the key findings and, most importantly, what it all means for you.
What's interesting is that concerns about technology's impact on our brains aren't new. Like even before the smartphone era, researchers were noticing some red flags.
Yeah, there's that study from about 20 years ago that looked at the impact of email.
Oh, yeah.
Just email.
Hmm.
And the results were kind of shocking.
It really was like a canary in the coal mine.
Okay.
The study found that people's IQ scores actually dropped by an average of 10 points when they were constantly dealing with emails.
Wow.
That's double the impact of missing a night's sleep,
Really?
and even more significant than the cognitive effects of cannabis use.
Okay, a 10-point IQ drop, that's huge.
It is.
I mean, what does that actually translate to in real life?
Well, think about it this way. A 10-point drop in IQ can affect your work performance,
Oh.
your ability to learn new things,
Uh-huh.
even your problem-solving skills.
Yeah.
Imagine feeling constantly foggy like you can't quite think straight.
Right.
That's the kind of impact we're talking about.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it like that. And that was just email.
Yeah.
Now we've got smartphones that are basically glued to our hands 24/7. It makes you wonder what all that screen time is doing to our brains now.
Exactly. And the research on smartphone use paints a pretty sobering picture.
Okay.
In the UK, the average person spends over 4 hours online every day, with Gen Z men clocking in at 5.5 hours and women averaging a whopping 6.5 hours.
So if email alone was causing significant cognitive decline 2 decades ago, what happens when you layer on smartphones and social media and all the other digital distractions we face today?
That's where things get really concerning.
Okay.
Studies from leading institutions like Harvard, Oxford, and King's College all point to the same conclusion. Excessive internet and smartphone use can actually lead to structural changes in the brain, particularly in the gray matter.
Hold on, structural changes. You mean physically changing our brains?
Yes, and it's not just some abstract concept.
Mm,
Imagine your brain is like a muscle. If you don't use it, it gets weaker.
right.
And we're seeing that happen in specific areas of the brain that are essential for everyday life.
So which parts of the brain are we talking about, and how does it affect us?
The research shows that areas responsible for attention memory and social cognition,
Okay.
basically how we think, learn, remember, and interact with others,
Yeah.
are the ones being impacted.
So like the important stuff.
Yeah, some researchers even use terms like digital dementia to describe these changes,
Mm-hmm.
which, sounds pretty alarming.
Digital dementia, that's a pretty heavy term, but does it really mean our brains are becoming well damaged?
It's not about damage in the traditional sense. It's more about these areas not developing as they should,
Right.
or even shrinking over time. And
Yeah.
that has real consequences for how we function in the world.
One study that really caught my eye was from Stanford back in 2018.
Yeah, wow.
They found that people who are constantly multitasking online,
Uh-huh.
scrolling through social media while watching a video, texting while trying to work,
Yeah.
actually perform worse on memory and attention tests.
It's a classic example of how our digital habits are rewiring our brains. We think we're being super efficient by juggling multiple tasks, but in reality, we're just overloading our cognitive systems
Yeah.
and making it harder to focus on anything deeply.
I definitely feel that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have so many tabs open in my brain, it's like my thoughts are constantly getting interrupted.
And that constant interruption comes at a cost.
Yeah.
Our brains aren't designed for this kind of digital multitasking.
Hmm.
It depletes our mental energy and makes it harder to learn, remember, and even think creatively.
Okay, so we're starting to see a pretty clear link between tech overuse and these negative brain changes.
Yeah.
But what's actually happening at a neurological level? Why is our gray matter so susceptible to all this?
Well, the answer lies in a tiny little neurotransmitter called dopamine.
Okay.
The feel-good chemical
Mm-hmm.
our brains release when we experience something pleasurable.
Right.
And tech companies have figured out how to hijack this system.
Dopamine. So you're saying that checking my phone is giving me a little hit of pleasure chemicals.
Yeah, exactly. Think about the infinite scroll on social media. It's designed to keep you hooked.
Mhm.
You scroll, you see something interesting, your brain releases a little dopamine and you want more.
Right.
It's like a bottomless bag of chips. You just keep reaching for the next one.
But isn't dopamine also involved in healthy things like learning and motivation?
Absolutely. Dopamine is essential for all sorts of cognitive functions. The problem is that tech companies have figured out how to exploit this system,
Okay.
creating these feedback loops that keep us engaged even when it's not in our best interest.
So it's not just that technology is passively affecting our brains, it's that it's been actively designed to keep us hooked. That's kind of disturbing, actually.
It is, and the consequences go beyond just shrinking gray matter. One of the most alarming findings is the dramatic decline in attention spans over the past few decades.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that myself. It seems like it's getting harder and harder to focus on anything for an extended period of time.
The research bears that back in 2004, the average attention span was about 2.5 minutes. By 2012, it had dropped to 75 seconds.
Wow.
And just 6 years ago, it plummeted to a mere 37 seconds.
Hold on, 47 seconds. That's barely enough time to read a news article, let alone engage in a deep conversation or tackle a complex problem.
Exactly, and that's why this issue is so critical.
Yeah.
A shrinking attention span has profound implications for everything we do.
Yeah.
Our work, our relationships, our ability to learn and grow.
It's almost like we're losing our ability to think deeply and critically.
And that brings us to the work of Tristan Harris, a former Google design ethicist who's been sounding the alarm about what he calls the attention economy.
Okay.
He argues that tech companies are in a constant race to capture our attention, often using persuasive design techniques that exploit our psychological vulnerabilities.
Persuasive design. What exactly does that mean?
It's basically the art of using psychology and design principles to influence our behavior. Think about notifications, those little red dots that pop up on our phones, or the endless stream of content that's constantly vying for our attention. It's all carefully crafted to keep us engaged and coming back for more.
So it's not just about the content itself, it's about how it's presented to us
Right.
and how that presentation taps into our deepest instincts and desires.
Precisely. Harris uses some pretty strong language to describe this. He says persuasive technology has essentially taken control of the pen of human history
Wow.
and could lead us down a path of distraction and even catastrophe.
Okay, that sounds a bit dramatic, but I can see how constantly being pulled in different directions by these persuasive technologies could make it harder to focus on the things that truly matter.
And that's exactly his point. We're losing our ability to control our own attention, which has profound implications for our individual well-being and for society as a whole.
You know, it's interesting that the term brain rot wasn't coined by some scientist or tech expert. It actually came from Gen Z, the generation that's grown up with smartphones and social media.
That's a really important point. They're the ones who are experiencing the effects of this constant digital bombardment most acutely, and they're the ones who are starting to push back.
Right, there's this whole movement of young people embracing dumb phones, advocating for smartphone-free childhoods, and just generally questioning the role of technology in their lives.
It's incredibly encouraging to see they're recognizing the potential downsides of this always-on culture and seeking out alternatives that prioritize well-being and mental clarity.
So what does all this mean for us? Are we doomed to succumb to brain rot, or is there hope for reclaiming our attention and protecting our cognitive abilities?
The good news is that awareness is the first step, and we're clearly seeing that awareness grow. The more we understand how technology impacts our brains, the better equipped we are to make conscious choices about how we use it.
Okay, so let's talk about those choices. What can we actually do to combat this brain rot and regain control of our attention? I'm already feeling a little overwhelmed just thinking about all this.
It's understandable to feel overwhelmed, but the good news is that there are simple, practical steps we can take to protect our brains and reclaim our focus.
Okay, give me some practical tips. I'm all ears. What can I start doing today to make a difference?
Well, the first step is to become aware of your own tech habits. How much time are you spending online? What are you doing on your phone? Are you using it intentionally, or are you just mindlessly scrolling?
Right.
Once you have a clear picture of your current habits, you can start to make changes.
I like that awareness is key. Don't just blindly scroll. Ask yourself why you were picking up your phone in the first place.
Exactly. And once you've identified some areas where you could improve, start setting some boundaries, for example. You could try turning off notifications so you're not constantly bombarded with distractions.
Okay, turning off notifications makes sense, but I feel like my phone is an extension of my hand at this point. Are there any other practical strategies to break free from this tech dependence?
Absolutely. Another powerful strategy is to designate specific times for checking email and social media. Instead of being constantly reactive, you're in control of when and how you engage with these platforms.
So instead of checking my email every 5 minutes, I could set aside 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes in the evening to go through everything.
Exactly. That way you can be fully present with whatever else you're doing throughout the day, whether it's work, spending time with loved ones, or simply enjoying some quiet time to yourself.
That actually sounds really liberating. It's like reclaiming control of my time and attention.
Precisely. And when it comes to social media, it's worth asking yourself what you're actually getting out of it. Are you connecting with people you care about, learning something new, or are you just scrolling mindlessly out of habit?
Okay, that's a good point. I'm definitely guilty of the mindless scrolling. Sometimes it's like a default setting when I'm bored or have a few minutes to kill.
And that's where being more intentional comes in. Before you reach for your phone,
Mhm.
pause and ask yourself, what am I hoping to achieve by going on social media right now? If you don't have a clear purpose, maybe it's better to do something else.
So it's not about demonizing technology or becoming a tech hermit. It's about using it in a way that aligns with our values and supports our well-being.
Exactly. And that's where the concept of digital minimalism comes in.
Hmm.
It's not about deprivation. It's about intentionally choosing the technologies that add value to our lives and minimizing the ones that don't.
Okay, I've heard of digital minimalism, but honestly, I always thought it was just for tech geeks who want to live off the grid.
Not at all. It's simply about being more mindful of our digital consumption and making choices that support our mental clarity, focus, and overall well-being.
So instead of having 50 apps on my phone that I barely use, I might choose to just keep the 10 that I actually enjoy and that bring me value.
That's a great example. And instead of mindlessly following hundreds of accounts on social media, you might curate your feed to just include the people and organizations that truly inspire you or provide valuable information.
I can see how that would make a huge difference. It's like decluttering your digital life to create more space for the things that truly matter.
And it's not just about what we do online, it's also about what we do offline. Making time for activities that don't involve screens is crucial for maintaining a healthy balance and giving our brains a chance to rest and recharge.
So things like spending time in nature, reading books, having face-to-face conversations, pursuing hobbies.
Exactly. These activities allow us to tap into different parts of our brains, cultivate creativity, and foster deeper connections with ourselves and the world around us.
It's like hitting the reset button on our brains and reminding ourselves that there's more to life than just the digital realm.
That's a great way to put it, and it's something we need to prioritize if we want to counteract the brain rot effects of excessive technology use.
You know, it's interesting how this whole brain rot conversation kind of ties back to the skibidi toilet phenomenon we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah, it does seem like a silly internet trend on the surface, but, perhaps it reflects a deeper anxiety we have about what's happening to our minds.
Maybe it's a sign that we're starting to realize like we're losing something important, our ability to focus, to think critically, to connect with each other on a deeper level.
Right. And it's not just an individual concern. This has, significant implications for society as a whole.
That's what I was thinking. What happens if a whole generation grows up with like shortened attention spans and inability to think deeply? What does that mean for our future?
It's a question that keeps many experts up at night. Imagine a society where critical thinking and problem-solving skills are diminished, where people are easily swayed by misinformation and emotional appeals.
Yeah, it paints a pretty bleak picture. I mean, look at the state of political discourse these days. It often feels like reasoned debate has been replaced by sound bites and outrage.
Right? That's a prime example of how a decline in attention spans and critical thinking can impact society. It becomes harder to engage in nuanced conversations when our brains are constantly seeking the next dopamine hit.
And as we discussed earlier, Kristen Harris argues that some tech companies are actually exploiting this vulnerability, using persuasive design techniques to keep us hooked on their platforms, even if it's not in our best interest.
Yeah, he makes a compelling argument. When you combine the addictive nature of technology with the spread of misinformation and the rise of filter bubbles, it creates a perfect storm for societal division and polarization.
So what can we do about it? Does this mean we need to abandon technology altogether and go live in a tech-free commune?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
As with most things in life, it's about finding a healthy balance.
Right.
We need to be aware of the potential downsides of technology use,
Okay.
but also recognize its incredible potential for good.
Okay, so No need to ditch our smartphones just yet, but how do we find that balance? How do we push back against these negative trends and create a more mindful digital culture?
It's a multifaceted challenge that requires a combination of individual action and systemic change on an individual level. We can start by implementing the strategies we've already discussed, setting boundaries with technology, being more intentional with our screen time, cultivating offline activities that nourish our minds and spirits.
Right. So it starts with each of us taking responsibility for our own digital well-being. But what about the bigger picture? How do we address the systemic issues that are driving these negative trends?
That's where we need to advocate for change at a societal level. We can support organizations that are pushing for more ethical design, from tech companies, demand greater transparency around data collection and algorithms, and advocate for policies that protect our digital rights and well-being.
So it's a combination of individual action and collective effort we need to make changes in our own lives, but also work together to create a digital landscape that is more humane, ethical, and sustainable.
That's a great way to put it, and it's not an easy task.
Yeah.
But I believe that with growing awareness and a commitment to change, we can create a future where technology empowers us rather than enslaves us.
This has been a truly eye-opening conversation. I'm feeling a mix of concern about the challenges we've discussed, but also a sense of hope that we can find solutions.
I feel the same way, and I think it's fitting that we started this conversation with the absurdity of Skibidi Toilet, because it highlights the absurdity of a world where our attention is constantly being hijacked by things that offer little to no value.
It's like a wake-up call, a reminder that we need to be vigilant about how we use our time and attention, and that we have the power to choose something different.
Exactly. We can choose to engage with technology in a way that supports our well-being, our relationships, and our ability to contribute to a better world.
So to our listeners out there, the next time you find yourself mindlessly scrolling or feeling overwhelmed by the digital noise, remember this conversation. Remember that you have the power to choose something different.
You have the power to reclaim your attention, your focus, your ability to think critically and creatively. You have the power to shape your own digital experience and to contribute to a more mindful and humane digital culture.
It's not about rejecting technology altogether. It's about using it consciously, intentionally, and in a way that enhances our lives rather than diminishes them.
And if we can do that, I believe we can unlock the true potential of technology, not just as a tool for entertainment or distraction, but as a force for good in the world.
Well said. This has been an incredible deep dive. Thanks for sharing your insights and expertise.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery. Remember, the power to change the future is in your hands and in your minds. Choose wisely and choose well.